The clinking of silverware against porcelain was the only sound in the cavernous dining room, a polite, rhythmic counterpoint to the tension coiling in my gut. Across the polished mahogany table, Ilara squeezed my hand, her smile a small, brave flag against the encroaching tide of her family's disapproval. It was our 5th anniversary, a milestone that felt less like a celebration and more like a trial. "To Leo," Alastair said, raising his wine glass. His voice, smooth as the expensive Merlot he was drinking, filled the room. "Farewell for trying so hard." The insult, wrapped in the guise of a toast, hung in the air. I saw the flicker of pain in Alara's eyes, the tightening of her jaw. She loved her family, but their love was a conditional, suffocating thing. Alastair, her older brother, was the worst of them. He was a man who wore his charisma like a bespoke suit, tailored to hide the rot underneath. "He does more than try, Alastair," Alara said, her voice quiet but firm. "He succeeds, we're happy." Eleanor, Alastair's wife, let out a delicate, dismissive laugh. "Happy is a relative term, darling. One person's happiness is another's, well, you know. I was an architect, a good one. I built things that were solid, functional, beautiful. But in the world of the Beaumonts, a world of inherited wealth and cutthroat business deals, I was a curiosity, a quaint relic from a bygone era. I didn't make enough money, I didn't have the right connections, I was enough." Ilara had a weak heart, a condition she'd had since birth. It was a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety in our lives, a reminder of her fragility. Stress made it worse, and her family was a perpetual source of it. I saw the way her hand trembled as she reached for her water glass, the faint blue tinge to her lips that she tried to hide with a quick smile. I wanted to scoop her up and carry her away from this place, from these people who were slowly, inexorably killing her with their expectations and their judgment. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Alara's head on my chest, I could feel the frantic, irregular rhythm of her heart. "I'm sorry about tonight," she whispered. "It's not your fault," I said, my voice rough with a helplessness I couldn't shake. "They're just them." "He's not always like that," she said, a familiar defense of a brother who didn't deserve it. "He's just protective of me." "Protective?" I scoffed. "Ilara, he's a shark and he smells blood in the water." She didn't answer, and I knew she was crying, silent tears that soaked into my shirt. I held her tighter, a futile gesture against the forces that were arrayed against us. I was an architect, a builder of things, but I didn't know how to build a fortress that could protect her from her own family. And I was about to find out that the foundations of our life were built on sand, and the tide was coming in. A week later, Alastair called me. It was unusual. He typically communicated through Ilara, using her as a reluctant intermediary. His tone was different, too. The usual condescension was replaced by a conspiratorial warmth that immediately put me on edge. "Leo, my boy," he said, his voice oozing bonhomie, "I've been thinking about you and Ilara." I waited, saying nothing. I knew this was a performance, and I was determined not to play my part. "I know things have been tense," he continued, a masterful understatement. "And I want to help. I've come across an opportunity, a real game changer, a boutique hotel development right on the coast. It's a sure thing, Leo. A way for you to secure your future, to give Ilara the life she deserves." The life she deserves. The words were a subtle poison, a reminder of my perceived inadequacy. He was dangling a golden apple, and he knew I was hungry. Not for the money, but for the peace of mind, for a way to finally silence the Beaumonts' whispers of my failure. He laid out the details, a seductive tapestry of profit margins and five-star amenities. He showed me architectural drawings, glossy renderings of a sleek, modern hotel that looked like something I would have designed myself. It was a vision of a life we could have, a life free from the suffocating weight of the Beaumonts' disapproval. I was hesitant. I was an architect, not a gambler. I knew the risks of property development, the thousand things that could go wrong. But then he played his trump card. "Think about Ilara's health," he said, his voice dropping to a somber, concerned tone. The stress of your financial situation, it can't be good for her. This is a chance to take all that worry away, to give her the peace and security she needs. He was a monster, a master manipulator. He was using my love for my wife as a weapon against me, and it was working. I told him I'd think about it. I went home and talked to Alara. I tried to be objective, to lay out the pros and cons. But she saw the hope in my eyes, the desperate desire to finally be seen as an equal in her family's eyes. She wanted to believe in her brother, to believe that he was finally extending a genuine olive branch. Maybe he's trying to make things right, she said, her voice full of a hope that I didn't share. Maybe this is his way of showing that he cares. We had a small inheritance from her grandmother, a nest egg we'd been saving for a rainy day. It was everything we had. And with a heavy heart, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach, I agreed to invest it all. I met Alistair at his office, a sleek minimalist space that screamed money and power. I signed the papers, my hand trembling slightly. He clapped me on the back, a gesture of false camaraderie that made my skin crawl. "You've done the right thing, Leo," he said, his smile a predatory slash in his handsome face. "This is the beginning of a new chapter for you and Alara." He was right. It was the beginning of a new chapter. But it was a chapter of betrayal, of loss, of a darkness I could never have imagined. The gilded trap had been sprung, and I had walked right into it, dragging my beloved Alara with me. The first sign of trouble was a return check, a small one written to the local grocer, but it was marked insufficient funds. I stared at it, a cold dread seeping into my bones. It had to be a mistake, a bank error. I'd transferred our entire savings to the investment account Alistair had set up. The money was there. It had to be. I called the bank. The teller on the other end was polite but firm. The account was empty, not just low but empty, a perfect, clean zero. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hand holding the phone began to shake. "That's impossible," I stammered. "There was a wire transfer, a large one." "I see the record of the incoming transfer, sir," she said, her voice tinged with a practiced, impersonal sympathy. "And I see an outgoing wire transfer for the same amount, made the following day, to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." The world tilted on its axis. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. An offshore account. The words echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my mind. I hung up the phone, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It couldn't be. Alistair wouldn't, he couldn't. I called him, my fingers fumbling with the buttons on my phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called his office. His secretary, a woman who had always treated me with a cloying, condescending sweetness, was suddenly as cold and impenetrable as a bank vault. "Mr. Beaumont is in a meeting," she said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "It's an emergency," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "I need to speak with him. It's about the hotel investment." There was a long pause. Then, "Mr. Beaumont is no longer associated with that project. All inquiries are to be directed to the holding company." She gave me a name, a meaningless string of letters and numbers, and a P.O. box address. And then she hung up. The truth hit me then, a physical blow that knocked the air from my lungs. It was all a lie. The hotel, the renderings, the promises, all of it. A meticulously crafted illusion designed for one purpose, to steal our money. I was still standing in the kitchen, the returned check clutched in my hand, when Alara came in. She took one look at my face and knew. Her own face, already so pale, went ashen. "Leo," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "what is it? What has happened?" I couldn't speak. I could only hold out the check, a flimsy piece of paper that represented the complete and utter devastation of our lives. She didn't need to ask any more questions. She saw it all in my eyes. The betrayal, the ruin, the sheer, unadulterated evil of what her brother had done. She swayed, her hand flying to her chest. Her breath hitched, a sharp, painful sound that tore through the silence. "Ilara," I cried, rushing to her side. But it was too late. Her eyes rolled back in her head and she collapsed, a fragile, broken doll in my arms. The hospital was a blur of sterile white walls and hushed, urgent voices. I sat in the waiting room, my clothes rumpled, my hands stained with the ink from the returned check. I was in a state of shock, my mind a maelstrom of grief and rage. The Beaumonts arrived, a phalanx of grim-faced executioners. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice a whip crack in the quiet room. "You," she hissed, her eyes blazing with a cold, reptilian fury. "This is your fault. You and your stupid, greedy ambition." "My ambition," I choked out, my voice raw with disbelief. "Your brother, he stole everything from us." Alistair stepped forward, his face a mask of sorrowful concern. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Leah, I don't know what you're talking about. The investment was a risk. You knew that. I lost money, too." It was a lie, a bald-faced, audacious lie. But the rest of the family closed ranks around him, a wall of wealth and privilege that I could never hope to penetrate. They blamed me for the lost money, for Alara's collapse, for everything. They painted me as a fool, a gullible, incompetent man who had gambled away his wife's inheritance and broken her heart. The doctor came out then, his face grave. Alara had suffered a massive heart attack. She was alive, but barely. She was in the ICU, her life hanging by a thread. "We need to keep her as calm as possible," the doctor said, his eyes scanning our faces. "No stress, no agitation." Eleanor seized on his words, her voice ringing with a triumphant, venomous authority. "He's not to see her," she said, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He is the source of her stress. He is not to go anywhere near her." The doctor, caught in the crossfire of a family war he didn't understand, could only nod, his expression a mixture of pity and frustration. They barred me from her room. They had security guards posted at the door. I was an outcast, a pariah, a man accused of the very crime that had been committed against him. I stood in the hallway, the sounds of the hospital fading into a dull roar in my ears. I was a builder of things, a man who believed in structure, in order, in the fundamental integrity of the world. And in the space of a single day, the entire edifice of my life had been leveled, reduced to a pile of rubble and dust. I had lost my home, my future, and now they were trying to steal my wife. I didn't know it then, but the betrayal was not yet complete. The worst was yet to come. The days that followed were a special kind of hell, a purgatory of linoleum floors and the antiseptic smell of despair. I haunted the hospital corridors, a ghost in my own life, subsisting on stale coffee and the dregs of a hope that was rapidly dwindling. Every attempt to see Alara was met with a cold, immovable wall of Beaumont-funded security. They had turned the hospital, a place of healing, into a fortress to keep me out. I tried everything. I reasoned, I pleaded, I raged. I called Eleanor and Alistair, leaving frantic, desperate voicemails that were never returned. I even tried to ambush the doctor, cornering him in the hallway, but he just shook his head, his eyes full of a weary pity that was almost worse than the Beaumonts' open hostility. "My hands are tied, Mr. Jensen," he'd said. "The family has power of attorney. They've made it very clear. You are not to have any contact." They were erasing me from her life systematically, cruelly. I imagined her waking up, disoriented and afraid, asking for me. What lies were they telling her? That I had abandoned her, that I was the cause of her pain. The thought was a physical torment, a hot poker twisting in my gut. My only updates came in the form of terse, impersonal text messages from Eleanor, each one a small, calculated cruelty. "No change. She's resting. The doctors are doing everything they can." Each message was a reminder of my powerlessness, a testament to their complete and utter control over the situation. Then, 1 week after her collapse, the text stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the sterile updates. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, staring at the monolithic building, a prisoner locked out of the castle where his princess lay dying. My phone remained dark, a silent, mocking testament to my isolation. The next day, a courier delivered a letter. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, the paper thick and expensive, the letterhead embossed with a name that meant nothing to me. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The language was cold, formal, a sterile recitation of legal jargon that felt obscene in its detachment. It informed me, with deepest regret, that Alara had passed away peacefully in her sleep. It spoke of her long and courageous battle with her illness, a battle that I knew had been exacerbated by the stress of their betrayal. It mentioned that the Beaumont family would be handling all funeral arrangements and that, in accordance with Alara's final wishes, I was not to attend. Her final wishes. The lie was so audacious, so monstrous that I couldn't even process it at first. Alara, my Alara, who had loved me with a fierce, unwavering devotion, would never have made such a request. This was the Beaumonts, twisting the knife one last time, trying to sever our connection even in death. I went to the funeral anyway. I stood at the back of the cemetery, a solitary figure in a rumpled suit, my heart a cold, dead weight in my chest. The Beaumonts were all there, a tableau of performative grief. They wore their sorrow like expensive jewelry, a public display of a pain they had no right to claim. Alastair delivered the eulogy. He stood before the assembled mourners, his voice thick with a manufactured emotion that made my stomach turn. He spoke of Alara's kindness, her gentle spirit, her tragic, untimely death. And then, with a masterful, venomous skill, he began to weave his narrative, a tapestry of lies that painted me as the villain of the story. He didn't mention me by name, of course. He was too clever for that. But he spoke of the unfortunate choices Alara had made in her life, of the financial and emotional burdens she had been forced to bear. He spoke of her unwavering loyalty to those who did not deserve it, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, a silent, damning indictment that was meant for me and me alone. He was painting her as a victim, not of her illness, not of her family's toxicity, but of me. He was erasing our love, our happiness, our life together, and replacing it with a narrative of his own making, a story in which he was the grieving brother and I was the feckless, unworthy husband who had led his sister to her doom. Something inside me snapped then. The grief, the raw, agonizing grief that had been my constant companion for days, began to change. It was a chemical reaction, a transmutation of sorrow into something else, something harder, colder, more dangerous. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a formless, suffocating fog. It was a diamond, sharp and clear and unbreakable. I looked at the Beaumonts, at their tear-streaked faces and their designer mourning clothes, and I saw them for what they were. Not just thieves, not just liars, but murderers. They had stolen our money, yes, but they had also stolen Alara's final days, her peace, her memory. They had isolated her, filled her with their poison, and then, when she was gone, they had tried to steal the very truth of who she was. That was the unforgivable sin, the one that could never be redeemed, the one that demanded not just justice, but retribution. As the mourners began to disperse, their faces a mixture of sympathy and morbid curiosity, I slipped away, unnoticed, a ghost at my own wife's funeral. I walked away from the cemetery, from the life I had known, from the man I had been. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in my chest, but it was no longer the only thing. It was now intertwined with a new, terrible purpose, a cold, clear resolve that settled over me like a shroud. They had taken everything from me. My wife, my home, my future, my name. They had left me with nothing but the ashes of a life that had been. But as I walked away from that place, a new, dark thought began to take root in the barren landscape of my soul. They had left me with nothing to lose, and in doing so, they had made me the most dangerous man in the world. The house was a mausoleum. Every object, every surface was saturated with the memory of Alara. Her favorite mug left by the sink, the half-finished novel on her bedside table, a silent testament to a life interrupted. For weeks I drifted through the rooms, a ghost in my own home, the silence a physical weight pressing down on me. The rage I'd felt at the funeral had cooled not into apathy, but into something more patient, more deliberate. It was a low pilot light of hatred, waiting for fuel. I started with the paperwork. It was a way to feel productive, to impose some kind of order on the chaos of my life. I sorted through bills, insurance policies, bank statements, the mundane artifacts of a life that no longer existed. It was in a box in the back of my office closet, a box labeled Our Future, that I found it. The investment prospectus. It was a beautiful thing, a masterpiece of corporate propaganda. Thick, glossy paper, stunning photographs of the coastline, and elegant, persuasive prose that promised a world of effortless wealth and luxury. It was a siren song in print, and I had steered our ship directly onto the rocks. I almost threw it away. The sight of it was a physical pain, a reminder of my own stupidity of the moment I had signed away our lives. But something stopped me. The architect in me, the man who had spent his life studying blueprints and schematics, took over. I spread the documents out on the dining room table, the same table where we had endured that last, terrible anniversary dinner. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just looking. I let my eyes drift over the pages, the financial projections that were pure fantasy, the legal disclaimers that were a smokescreen of impenetrable jargon. And then I saw them, the architectural drawings. They were beautiful, of course. A sleek, modern design, all glass and steel and soaring lines. It was the kind of building I dreamed of designing. But as I looked closer, a flicker of unease, a tiny, discordant note in the symphony of deception, caught my attention. It was the watermark, a faint, almost invisible insignia in the bottom right-hand corner of the page. A stylized V intertwined with a D. Vantage Designs. I knew that firm. They had been brilliant, innovative, a rising star in the architectural world. And they had gone bankrupt 3 years ago, their assets liquidated, their intellectual property scattered to the winds. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat in the silent house. I scanned the other drawings. The same watermark was on every single one. These weren't new designs commissioned for a new project. They were old, recycled, stolen from a dead company. Alistair hadn't even bothered to create a new lie, he had simply repackaged an old one. It was the first thread, the first solid, undeniable proof that this wasn't just a risky investment that had gone bad. It was a deliberate, premeditated fraud from the very beginning. The entire edifice was a sham, a house of cards built on a foundation of stolen dreams. I sat there for a long time, the drawing spread out before me, the silence of the house no longer oppressive but charged with a new electric energy. The grief was still there, a hollow ache that would never truly go away. But it was no longer a paralyzing force. It was a whetstone, and the rage was a blade being sharpened against it. My mission, my purpose, crystallized in that moment. This was no longer about justice. Justice was a courtroom, a judge, a jury. It was a system that the Beaumonts knew how to manipulate, how to buy and sell. This was about retribution. It was about dismantling their world, brick by brick, lie by lie, until they were left with nothing but the rubble of their own making. They had made me a ghost in my own life. They had erased me from my wife's final days, from her memory, from the world. And now I would become a ghost in theirs. A ghost in their ledgers, in their bank accounts, in the very foundations of their gilded lives. I would haunt them, not with chains and moans, but with the cold, hard logic of their own corruption. I looked at the picture of Alara on the mantelpiece, her smile a beacon in the gathering gloom. "I'm going to build you a monument, my love," I whispered, my voice hoarse with a terrible, newfound resolve. Not of stone or steel, but of their ruin. The architect was dead. The husband was dead. All that was left was the instrument of their vengeance. The first step was to erase Leo Jensen. He was a ghost, but a ghost with a credit history, a social security number, a past. Ghosts don't have those things. Ghosts don't have attachments. Sold the house. The real estate agent, a woman with a professionally sympathetic smile, told me I was getting a good price. I didn't care, I just wanted it gone. The memories were too loud, the silence too heavy. I took only one thing, the photograph of Alara from the mantelpiece. Everything else, the furniture we'd picked out together, the books we'd read, the life we'd built, I left behind. It was a snake shedding its skin. The skin was a part of me, but I couldn't carry it where I was going. I cashed out my retirement account, the modest sum a testament to a future that would never happen. I closed my bank accounts, paid my final bills, and with a few $1,000s in cash and a backpack containing a change of clothes, a laptop, and Alara's picture, I walked away. I became a man without a history, a man without a name. The next 2 years were a blur of cheap motels, public libraries, and the flickering glow of a computer screen. I was no longer an architect. I was a student, a scholar of the dark arts of finance. I devoured textbooks on forensic accounting, my architect's eye for detail finding a new home in the labyrinthine world of balance sheets and audit trails. I learned to see the patterns, the hidden symmetries, the deliberate obfuscations that were the language of financial crime. I studied corporate law, not the kind they teach in law school, but the kind they practice in the shadowy world of offshore tax havens and shell corporations. I learned how to create and dissolve legal entities, how to layer them like Russian nesting dolls, each one a shield for the one within. I learned the language of the enemy, the vocabulary of their greed. I lived on the fringes, a ghost in the machine. I ate cheap, I slept little, I spoke to no one. My only companion was the cold, burning rage that had become the furnace of my existence. It was a fuel that never ran out, a purpose that never wavered. Every time I felt the pull of despair, the siren song of grief, I would look at Alara's picture. I would remember Alistair's smug, handsome face at the funeral, the casual cruelty in Alina's eyes, and the fire would burn hotter. I started with the shell company that had swallowed our savings. It was a dead end, of course, a legal entity designed to evaporate on contact, but it was a starting point. I used my newfound knowledge to trace the digital breadcrumbs, the faint, almost invisible trail of data that even the most careful criminal leaves behind. I followed the money. It was a journey into a world of breathtaking corruption. The trail led me from the Cayman Islands to Panama, from Swiss bank accounts to anonymous holding companies in Delaware. Alistair was more than just a casual fraudster. He was a predator, a financial sociopath who had built an empire on the ruins of other people's lives. I found other victims, other stories of betrayal and ruin, each one a fresh log on the fire of my hatred. I learned to be patient, to be meticulous. I was building a case, not for a courtroom but for a day of reckoning. I created a new identity for myself, a digital ghost with a plausible backstory, a clean credit history, and a name that was as forgettable as my own had once been. I was a man who didn't exist, and that made me invisible. I was no longer Leo Jensen, the grieving architect. He was a man who built things, a man who believed in foundations and structures. That man was dead, buried with his wife. I was something else now. I was the architect of their destruction. I was the ghost in their ledgers. I was the slow, patient, inexorable force that was coming for them. And I was almost ready to begin. 2 years of living in the shadows had forged a new man. Leo Jensen was a memory, a ghost I had laid to rest alongside my wife. In his place stood Julian Croft. Julian was everything Leo was not, confident, enigmatic, and radiating an aura of quiet, predatory power. He wore bespoke suits that fit him like a second skin. His hair was cut sharp and styled, and he'd cultivated a faint, unplaceable European accent that added to his mystique. The transformation was more than just cosmetic. It was a psychological armor, a role I had rehearsed in front of countless motel mirrors until it became second nature. Julian Croft's debut was at a charity auction for the city's elite, the kind of event the Beaumonts frequented as a matter of course. It was a glittering affair, a room full of piranhas disguised in tuxedos and evening gowns, their smiles as sharp and dangerous as their appetites. I moved through the crowd with a practiced ease, a ghost in plain sight, my eyes scanning for my first target. His name was Marcus Thorne. I knew him from my research, a property developer Alastair had partnered with on a resort project 5 years ago. And like so many others, he had been cheated, pushed out of the deal just before it became profitable, his investment absorbed, his reputation tarnished. He was a man nursing a grudge, a man who was just waiting for an opportunity to return the favor. I found him by the bar, nursing a whiskey, his face a mask of bored resentment. I didn't approach him directly. Instead, I stood nearby, close enough for him to overhear my conversation with the bartender. "A pity about the Sterling Coal merger," I said, my voice pitch just loud enough to carry. I had high hopes for it. The bartender, a professional automaton, just nodded, but I saw the flicker of interest in Thorne's eyes. The Sterling Coal merger was a Beaumont deal, a major acquisition that was supposed to be a secret, known only to a handful of insiders. I let the silence hang for a moment, then continued, as if thinking aloud. But with the zoning board's environmental impact review, well, it's going to be a messy, public fight. And if someone were to, say, anonymously tip off the press about the irregularities in the land survey, the whole thing could collapse. I turned then, as if noticing Thorne for the first time. I gave him a brief, polite nod, a flicker of a smile, and then walked away. I didn't need to do anything else. I had planted the seed. I had given a hungry dog a map to the butcher shop. I knew Thorne's greed and his desire for revenge would do the rest. I left the auction and flew to another city, another identity, another life. I didn't need to stay and watch the fireworks. I had lit the fuse, and I knew the explosion was coming. A week later it did. The financial news was buzzing with the story. The Sterling Coal merger had imploded. An anonymous tip to a leading financial journalist had exposed a series of environmental violations and a fraudulent land survey. The deal was dead. The Beaumonts' reputation had taken a significant hit, and their company's stock had plummeted, costing them millions. I was in a coffee shop in Chicago when I read the news, a small, cold smile touching my lips. It was the first drop of blood in the water, the first brick to be dislodged from the facade of their empire. But the real prize was the question that I knew would be echoing in the Beaumonts' boardroom. Who was the source of the leak? How did they know about the land survey? Who was this ghost who had drifted into their world, whispered a few words into the right ear, and then vanished? I had created a mystery, a vacuum, and I knew Alastair's arrogance, his insatiable need to be the smartest man in the room, would compel him to find the answer. He would not be able to resist the lure of the unknown, the challenge of a new player in the game. I had built a new foundation, not of concrete and steel, but of whispers and shadows. And now I would wait for the Beaumonts to come to me. It took 3 weeks. I had created a digital footprint for Julian Croft that was both impeccable and elusive. He had a holding company in Switzerland, a portfolio of discreet but impressive investments, and a reputation, cultivated through carefully placed rumors, as a man who solved problems for the ultra-wealthy. He was a whisper in the right circles, a ghost who could be summoned, but only by those who knew how to ask. Alastair didn't disappoint. The first contact was an email not from him but from a high-priced law firm that acted as the Beaumonts' consigliere. The language was cautious, an invitation to a mutually beneficial discussion. I ignored it. 2 days later another email arrived, this one more direct, mentioning a shared interest in corporate security. I ignored that one too. I was teaching the shark to beg. The third communication was a personal call from Alastair himself. His voice was a carefully controlled blend of charm and command, the voice of a man who was not used to being ignored. "Mr. Croft," he began, the name Julian feeling both foreign and familiar on his tongue. "You're a hard man to get a hold of." "I'm not for sale, Mr. Beaumont," I replied, my voice calm, my accent flawless. I was in a sterile, minimalist apartment I'd rented for the occasion, a blank canvas for the persona I was projecting. I choose my associates very carefully. "So I've heard," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. He thought this was a negotiation, a game of alpha male posturing. He had no idea he was a fly walking into a spider's web. "I have a proposition for you, a consultation. Your fee will be substantial." "My fee is irrelevant," I said, letting the silence stretch. "Your problems, however, are interesting." We met at a private club, a place of old money and older secrets. I chose the venue, a subtle power play that he would have recognized and in his arrogance respected. I arrived last, another calculated move. He was sitting in a leather armchair, a portrait of impatient power. Eleanor was with him. I hadn't expected that. She was as I remembered her, cold, elegant, her eyes like chips of ice. "Mr. Croft," Alastair said, rising to his feet, his hand outstretched. I took it, my grip firm, my gaze steady. I felt nothing. The man who had destroyed my life was standing in front of me, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. The rage was still there, but it was a deep, subterranean river, its currents hidden from view. "Alastair," I said, a subtle breach of etiquette, using his first name to establish a footing of equality. "And this must be your sister, Eleanor." Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said, her voice as brittle as a shard of glass. "Your reputation precedes you," I said, my smile never reaching my eyes. "Both of you." Alastair, ever the pragmatist, got straight to the point. "The Sterling Coal merger, you knew. How?" I leaned back in my chair, a picture of relaxed confidence. "It's my business to know things. I see the cracks in the foundations before the building collapses. You had a weak point, a disgruntled former partner with a legitimate grievance. It was only a matter of time before someone exploited it." I didn't mention Marcus Thorne by name. I didn't have to. I was showing them the blueprint of their own vulnerability. "And I suppose you're the man who can fix our cracks?" Eleanor asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "I don't fix cracks," I replied, my gaze meeting hers. "I reinforce the foundations. I anticipate the earthquake. What happened with Sterling Coal was a tremor. There are other, more significant seismic events on your horizon." I let that hang in the air, a veiled threat that was also a promise. I could see the greed in Alastair's eyes, the quick, calculating mind already seeing the possibilities. He saw me as a tool, a weapon, a way to protect his ill-gotten empire. Eleanor was not so easily convinced. "You're very confident, Mr. Croft, for a man with no past." So she had been digging. Good. It meant she was taking me seriously. "My past is irrelevant," I said. "My results are not. For example, your family's shipping subsidiary. The one that's been using falsified customs declarations to undervalue its cargo. A random audit, a disgruntled port official, and your entire supply chain could be frozen for months. The financial and legal exposure would be catastrophic." The blood drained from Alastair's face. Eleanor's mask of cold composure finally cracked, a flicker of genuine shock in her eyes. This was a secret they thought was buried deep, a piece of routine corruption that was the bedrock of their import-export business. I had just handed them a lit stick of dynamite and offered to show them how to defuse it. "Who are you?" Alastair asked, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I'm the man who is going to save your family from itself," I said, my voice soft, almost hypnotic. "For a price." I could see the war in their eyes. Eleanor's suspicion was battling with the undeniable truth of what I had just revealed. Alastair's arrogance was at war with his fear. But I knew which side would win. Greed and fear are the most powerful forces in the Beaumont's world. "You're hired," Alastair said, his voice tight. Eleanor said nothing, but her silence was a concession, a surrender. The fox was in the henhouse. The architect was inside the walls. And now the real work could begin. For 6 months, I became the Beaumont's shadow, their confessor, their architect of deceit. I moved through their lives with a quiet, unobtrusive efficiency, becoming as indispensable as the air they breathed. I was Julian Croft, the miracle worker, the man who made problems disappear. I restructured their shipping subsidiary, creating a new, even more complex web of shell corporations that made the old one look like child's play. I neutralized a brewing lawsuit from a disgruntled shareholder, using a combination of blackmail and financial intimidation that would have made Alistair proud. I made them millions, and in doing so, I earned their trust. It was a sickening, soul-crushing performance. I sat in their boardrooms, ate at their table, listened to their casual, cruel gossip about the very people they were destroying. I smiled, I nodded, I offered sage advice, all the while feeling the ghost of Alara at my shoulder, her silent, sorrowful presence a constant reminder of my true purpose. Alina's suspicion never entirely faded, but it was blunted by my success. I was a tool, a valuable asset, and the Beaumonts had always been pragmatic about their tools. Alistair, his ego stoked by the success I had brought him, saw me as an extension of his own genius, a reflection of his own brilliance in finding me. I waited for the perfect moment, the moment when their faith in me was at its zenith, their greed at its most insatiable. I called a special meeting at their corporate headquarters, a sterile, glass and steel monument to their avarice. I told them I had a proposal, a final solution to all their problems, a legacy project that would secure their name for a generation. They were all there. Alistair, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Alina, her posture rigid, her face a mask of cautious curiosity. And the senior Beaumonts, a pair of aging predators who had long ago outsourced their conscience to their children. I stood before them, a PowerPoint presentation loaded on the massive screen behind me, the architect ready to unveil his masterpiece. For the past 6 months, I began, my voice calm and measured, we have been playing defense. We have been plugging leaks, putting out fires, reacting to threats. It's time to go on the offensive. It's time to build something that is not just secure but untouchable. A fortress. I clicked to the first slide. On it in elegant serif font were 2 words, the AITA Foundation. A hush fell over the room. I saw the flicker of surprise, of confusion in their eyes. I had invoked the name of their dead daughter, the one name that was never spoken in this room, the one memory that was a source of a guilt they would never admit. A charitable trust, I continued, my voice dropping to a more somber, respectful tone, dedicated to cardiac research, a monument to Alara's memory, a testament to her spirit, a gift to the world in her name. Alistair shifted in his seat, a frown creasing his brow. A charity, Julian, we're not the Red Cross. You are missing the point, I said, my voice sharp, commanding. This is not about charity. This is about optics. It's about legacy. It's about turning your greatest vulnerability, the public perception of your family as ruthless, predatory capitalists, into your greatest strength. I moved to the next slide, a complex flowchart of interconnected legal entities. The AITA Foundation will be more than just a charity. It will be the ultimate holding company for the entire Beaumont family fortune. We will consolidate every asset, your stocks, your real estate, your offshore accounts, everything into this single tax-exempt entity. It will be an irrevocable trust, shielded from lawsuits, from government oversight, from the prying eyes of your enemies. It will be a financial black hole, a place where your wealth can grow, untouched, untaxed forever. I had them. I could see the greed in Alistair's eyes, the slow, dawning realization of the sheer, audacious genius of the plan. I was speaking their language, the language of loopholes and tax shelters and impenetrable legal firewalls. We will create a public narrative, I continued, my voice building to a crescendo. The story of a grieving family, turning their personal tragedy into a force for good. You will be philanthropists, patrons of medical science, saviors of the sick. The AITA Foundation will be your public face, a mask of unimpeachable virtue that will allow you to do whatever you want behind the scenes. The irony was so thick, so suffocating that I could almost taste it. I was selling them their own destruction, wrapped in the guise of their salvation, and they were buying it. Alina was the last to be convinced. "It's a big step," she said, her voice hesitant, "to put everything in one place, to give up that much control." "You're not giving up control," I said, turning to face her directly. "You are perfecting it. The foundation will be governed by a board consisting of you, your brother, your parents, and me as your advisor. You will have complete and total control over the assets, but to the outside world you will be nothing more than humble servants of a noble cause." I saved the final killing blow for last. "And think of the name, the AITA Foundation. Who would dare to question it? Who would dare to investigate a charity named for your dead daughter? It's a shield, a sword, and a monument all in one. It's the perfect crime." The room was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Alistair looked at Alina, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He saw it, the beauty of it, the sheer, unadulterated evil of it. "Do it," he said, his voice a low, triumphant growl. "Draw up the papers." I nodded, my face a mask of professional satisfaction. Inside, my heart was a cold, dead star. I had just handed them the pen to sign their own death warrant, and they had taken it, eagerly, without a moment's hesitation. The architect had designed the perfect trap, and now the Beaumonts were about to walk into it. The gala was the apotheosis of the Beaumonts' vanity. It was held in the grand ballroom of a five-star hotel, a room dripping with crystal chandeliers and the scent of expensive perfume. The city's elite were all there, a glittering constellation of wealth and power, their faces a mixture of envy and admiration. They had come to witness the public rebirth of the Beaumonts, the transformation from ruthless capitalists to noble philanthropists. I stood at the back of the room, a ghost in a tuxedo, watching the scene unfold. Alistair was in his element, gliding through the crowd with a practiced, predatory charm. Alina was a vision of icy elegance, her smile as sharp and brittle as a shard of glass. They were the king and queen of their own private universe, and tonight was their coronation. I had spent the last month working with a feverish, obsessive intensity. The legal framework of the AITA Foundation was a masterpiece of deception, a labyrinth of clauses and subclauses that gave me, as the sole, independent executor, a power that the Beaumonts in their arrogance had completely overlooked. They had been so focused on the tax shelters and the legal firewalls that they had failed to read the fine print. They had given me the keys to the kingdom, and they didn't even know it. The moment arrived. The lights dimmed, a hush falling over the crowd. A single spotlight illuminated the stage where Alistair stood, his face a mask of solemn, dignified grief. "Tonight," he began, his voice thick with a manufactured emotion that made my stomach turn, "we are not here to celebrate our success. We are here to honor a memory, the memory of my sister, Alina." He spoke of her kindness, her gentle spirit, her tragic, untimely death. It was a performance, a carefully rehearsed fiction designed to elicit sympathy and admiration. I watched the faces in the crowd, saw the tears welling in their eyes, and felt a cold, contemptuous rage. "And so," he concluded, his voice ringing with a triumphant, self-congratulatory tone, "in her name, we are proud to announce the formation of the AITA Foundation, a charitable trust dedicated to the fight against heart disease. A legacy of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit." A wave of applause swept through the room. The Beaumonts, seated at the front table, basked in the warm glow of public adoration. This was their moment of triumph, the culmination of their ambition, the final, perfect laundering of their name. And then the presentation began. The massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. But instead of the slick corporate video the Beaumonts were expecting, a different image appeared. It was a scanned document, a bank statement, showing a wire transfer from a small, local bank to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. "My bank statement, our life savings." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Alistair, his smile frozen on his face, stared at the screen, a flicker of panic in his eyes. He turned to the technician at the side of the stage, a man I had paid handsomely to follow my instructions to the letter. Then the next slide appeared. It was the architectural rendering of the fake hotel, the one Alistair had used to sell me on his scam. And next to it, a copy of the bankruptcy filing for Vantage Designs, the firm he had stolen the drawings from. The murmur grew louder. The faces in the crowd were no longer adoring but confused, intrigued. This was not the presentation they had been promised. This was something else entirely. The slides kept coming, a relentless, methodical deconstruction of the Beaumonts' empire of lies. The falsified customs declarations from their shipping company, the sworn affidavit from the disgruntled shareholder I had bribed, the intricate web of shell corporations, each one a testament to their greed and their corruption. And then the final slide. It was a photograph of me, not Julian Croft, the enigmatic consultant, but Leo Jensen, the grieving architect, the man they had destroyed, the man they had erased. The room was silent now, a thick, suffocating silence pregnant with the promise of a scandal that would echo through the city for years to come. I walked out of the shadows and onto the stage. I took the microphone from Alistair's limp, unresisting hand. He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief, his mind struggling to reconcile the ghost on the stage with the man he thought he had buried 2 years ago. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm, steady, amplified by the speakers to fill every corner of the room. "My name is Leo Jensen, and I was Ilara's husband." A collective gasp went through the crowd. I looked at Alina, at the senior Beaumonts. Their faces were a grotesque tableau of horror and recognition. The ghost had returned, and he had come for them. "For the past 2 years," I continued, my voice ringing with a cold, righteous fury, "you have been living a lie built on the foundations of my wife's stolen inheritance, on the ruins of my life. You have mourned a daughter you drove to her death. You have built a monument to a memory you tried to erase. But tonight, the lies end." I turned to face the Beaumonts, a prosecutor delivering his closing argument. "You thought you were creating a fortress, a tax shelter, a legacy, but you were mistaken. You were signing a confession. You were building your own prison." The unveiling was complete. The mask had been torn away, and now for the final act. The silence in the ballroom was a living thing, a palpable entity that seemed to suck the very air from the room. The faces of the city's elite, once a sea of adoration, were now a gallery of gawking, horrified masks. They were sharks who had scented blood in the water, and they were circling, their eyes wide with a delicious, predatory glee. The Beaumonts' public execution was the best show in town. I let the silence hang for a moment longer, savoring the exquisite, agonizing paralysis that had gripped the family. Alistair's face was a grotesque rictus of confusion and rage. Alina looked as if she had been turned to stone, her icy composure finally shattered into a million pieces. The senior Beaumonts, relics of a bygone era of unchallenged privilege, simply looked old, frail, defeated. "The Ilara Foundation," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel, "is, as I promised, an irrevocable trust. Its charter cannot be altered. Its assets cannot be touched. It is a fortress just as I designed it to be." A flicker of hope, of desperate, delusional hope, sparked in Alistair's eyes. He thought he had won. He thought the money was safe, even if his reputation was in tatters. "But you seem to have overlooked one crucial detail in the fine print," I continued, my voice dripping with a cold, contemptuous pity. "Article 7, Section 4. The clause that grants the sole, independent executor, that would be me, the absolute, unilateral authority to liquidate and disperse the Foundation's assets in the event of gross moral turpitude on the part of the board members." I paused, letting the words sink in, letting them understand the true, elegant horror of the trap I had built for them. "And I think we can all agree," I said, gesturing to the damning evidence still displayed on the screen behind me. That gross moral turpitude doesn't even begin to cover it. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. As of 1 hour ago, I exercised that authority. The AITA Foundation has been dissolved. Every asset, every stock, every piece of real estate, every dollar in every offshore account has been liquidated. The collective gasp from the crowd was a symphony to my ears. The Beaumonts were no longer just disgraced, they were destitute. A portion of the funds, I announced, my voice ringing with a triumphant righteous clarity, has already been wired to a trust account. A trust that will be used to repay every single victim of Alastair Beaumont's predatory financial schemes, with interest and damages. I saw a few faces in the crowd light up with a sudden, dawning comprehension. Marcus Thorne was there, a slow, wolfish grin spreading across his face. There were others, too, men and women I had only known as names on a list, victims of the Beaumonts' insatiable greed. They were my silent, unwitting army, and their day of justice had finally come. The remainder of the funds, I continued, my voice softening, the vast majority of the Beaumont family fortune, has been anonymously donated to the Johns Hopkins Cardiac Research Center, a real charity, a place where real doctors are doing real work to save real lives. The donation is a matter of public record. The world will know that the Beaumont name, for the first time in its history, has been associated with a genuine act of philanthropy. I turned to the Beaumonts, the architects of my pain, the authors of my vengeance. They were broken, hollowed-out shells of the titans they had once been. They had nothing left. Not their money, not their power, not their reputation. Nothing but the clothes on their backs and the crushing weight of their own public humiliation. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice a low, personal whisper that was somehow audible in the cavernous, silent room. "You took my wife, my life, my name. You left me with nothing, and now I have returned the favor." I clicked to the final slide. It was a photograph of Alara, the one from our mantelpiece, her smile radiant, her eyes full of a light that the Beaumonts had extinguished. And beneath it, a simple, devastating epitaph. "Her name is the only thing of value you have left, and now it belongs to me." I dropped the microphone. The thud echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. I turned my back on the wreckage of their lives and walked off the stage. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The house of cards had fallen. The foundation was ash. My work was done. The cemetery was quiet, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the night before. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and pine. I stood before her headstone, the simple granite slab that bore her name, Alara Jensen. No Beaumont, just Alara, my Alara. The rage was gone. It hadn't vanished in a sudden burst of catharsis, but had slowly, imperceptibly drained away, leaving behind a clean, quiet sorrow. The fire that had fueled me for 2 years had finally burned itself out, leaving only ash. But it was fertile ash, the kind that nourishes new growth. I wasn't triumphant. There was no joy in their ruin, no satisfaction in their despair. Their downfall hadn't brought Alara back. It hadn't erased the pain of her last days, the agony of her stolen memory. But it had brought something else, peace. A profound, unburdened peace that I hadn't realized I was craving. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, framed photograph of Alara, the one I had carried with me through every cheap motel, every late-night study session, every calculated deception. Her smile, radiant and full of life, looked up at me. I traced the outline of her face with my thumb, a ghost of a touch. "I did it, my love," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I built you a monument, not of stone or steel, but of justice. They can't touch your name now. It's clean, it's yours, it's ours." The Beaumonts were broken, financially, socially, personally. They were pariahs, their names synonymous with scandal and ruin. Their wealth, their power, their carefully constructed facade of respectability, all gone. They were left with nothing but the bitter taste of their own hubris, the ashes of their empire. And I was free, free from the suffocating weight of their injustice, free from the consuming fire of my own hatred. The path of revenge had been a dark and lonely one, a journey into the depths of my own soul. I had become a ghost, a shadow, a weapon. But now the battle was over. The weapon could be laid down. I thought about Julian Croft, the man I had become. He was a useful tool, a necessary disguise, but he wasn't me. Leo Jensen, the architect, the man who loved to build, was still there, buried beneath layers of grief and rage. And now he could finally begin to heal. I placed the photograph gently at the base of her headstone, letting it lean against the cool granite. The morning sun caught the glass, making her smile seem to shimmer, almost alive. I had inherited the ash of my former life, the debris of a world that had been shattered. But from that ash, I would build something new. Not a monument to vengeance, but a foundation for my own healing. A life lived not in the shadow of their malice, but in the quiet, enduring light of Alara's memory. I turned and walked away from the grave, leaving her to the peace she deserved. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time I felt a flicker of hope. The architect was ready to build again, not for revenge but for life, for Alara, for me.